With the Saturn freshly released in North America, it was clear that Sega was ready to retire the Genesis and move away from the 16-bit era. Software slowed to a trickle in Japan, and Sega was winding down projects elsewhere as well. Lucky for us, the team at Sega Technical Institute had a few titles they finished up after the release of the Saturn. One of those was the rather unique Comix Zone, a beat-em-up/adventure/puzzle game that was released in July of 1995. Often lauded as one of the most difficult games on the platform, we are going to take a look at it, talk about its gameplay, visuals, sound, and yes, even that much talked about challenge. I want to be upfront and tell you that I am not a fan of Sega of America's work, which typically was well below the output of their Japanese counterparts. With that said, let's jump right into it, my review of Comix Zone for the Sega Genesis. The story here starts with our would-be hero Sketch Turner working on his comic book during a vicious thunderstorm in New York City. A freak blast of lightning transfers Sketch into his comic book, while pulling the bad guy Mortis into the real world in his place. It's at this point you assume control and learn that you are in your very own comic book world. Mortis and his band of mutants have been attacking cities around the world, and with the help of an agent named Alyssa, you must put a stop to his nefarious plans. If you have the instruction manual to the game, there is actually a fairly detailed account of what makes up the backstory of Comix Zone, setting the mood proper to really enjoy what's happening. At first glance, Comix Zone appears to be a run-of-the-mill beat-em-up. You drop in and the first thing you're doing is wailing away on an enemy. And that is the reason why many of you will find Comix Zone not to your taste. The meat of the gameplay is indeed centered on beat-em-up-like attacks. You have a standard punch-kick combo, as well as combos that depend on the directional pad. You can also block and jump. But I have to be 100% clear here, Comix Zone is much more than a button-mashing beat-em-up. You try and play this like Streets of Rage and I guarantee you a death and a quick trip to the title screen. Comix Zone is as much a puzzler as it is a beat-em-up. You'll notice that in the top right hand corner of the screen, you have a spot to hold 3 items. You can get health replenishment, bombs, grenades, throwing knives, a screen-clearing superhero attack, and most importantly, your trusty rat sidekick, Roadkill. This little guy sniffs out items, flips switches, and can even help you attack enemies. How you use these items are just as important as the fighting you do on each panel. Those panels are set up just like a comic book, so once you clear one panel, you'll get an arrow to go on to the next. Sometimes you can go multiple directions, and there are also hidden panels that you can explore. One thing you will notice pretty quickly is that you take damage not just from enemies, but from simply attacking certain items as well. This appears at first as a ludicrous addition that cheapens the gameplay experience, but this is actually part of the replay value the developers intended. Each area has different ways that they can be approached, and rarely is brute force the best way to go. You'll need to explore, look for ways to tackle each panel and find the best solution. Again, a tried and true beat-em-up this is not. You'll also want to keep in mind that the controller you use greatly determines the default gameplay. Use a 6-button pad and block is manually used. Use a standard 3-button pad and block is an automatic animation. This does have an effect on how things feel, so I advise you test out the options of changing your buttons around to see which one best suits you. The graphics of Comix Zone really showed the Genesis still had a lot to offer even in 1995. Now 7 years on the market, this puts up color and animation that easily showed the platform was capable of going a few more years. Sprites are large and detailed, and I love the post-apocalyptic look of the backgrounds. They showed a world in ruin, and I really liked some of the water effects that popped up from time to time. The layout of the stages was so cool thanks to the comic book style presentation. Each panel was presented as essentially an escape room for our hero. Sometimes the exit was obvious, other times less so. The variety in the panels was nice as well. You'll go through dark and dank sewers, snowy mountains, and irradiated shipyards on this adventure. The developers set out to give you an experience of playing a comic book adventure, and they succeeded. The only negative here is that there are a few panels where some overzealous scrolling can get more enemies on the screen than the engine can handle, resulting in some nasty sprite flicker and slowdown. This is extremely uncommon, fortunately, and doesn't otherwise ruin a stellar showing for the Genesis. Comix Zone is a fantastic looking game and one the people of Sega Technical Institute should be proud of. Comix Zone uses the much reviled GEM sound driver for its audio. Hundreds of Western developed games used it, and let's be blunt here, most of them sounded like complete garbage. These releases account for much of the reason the Genesis sound capabilities has such a bad reputation. Every so often a GEMS game could surprise you though, and Comix Zone is one of those titles. Much of what is here is actually not bad at all, and depending on your taste in music, you might even love a fair bit of it. Hard guitar riffs dominate the tracks, some of the voice samples are incredible, and overall, I did not hate it nearly as much as I was originally expecting. The unique sound definitely fits the world and the action contained within. Let's have a listen and see what you think. I cannot stress enough the importance of looking at this title as less a beat-em-up and more an adventure game. Upon its initial release, I despised it. It was cheap, unfair, unbalanced, and a complete waste of my time. But that was going in with a beat-em-up mentality. I wanted the instant reward and satisfaction of beating stuff up, and I wanted to be a badass with no compromises. As time passed, I began to see people talk more about Comix Zone and express their joy in the way it makes you think and look for alternative means to get past its obstacles. It was only then that I dropped the expectation of a pure beat-em-up and started playing it as more of a survival horror adventure title. I shifted my focus from punching and kicking everything to using my items, especially the pet rat, to find new ways to deal with the challenge. This allowed me to get much further in Comix Zone than I had ever gotten before. I began to really take to the world and the idea of a much more evolved beat-em-up. To summarize, I went from hating it to it becoming one of my favorites. And that's going to be the hurdle for a great many of you. Initially, you're going to look at this as unfair and downright dastardly. The initial challenge is brutal to newcomers and you'll be losing lives left, right, and center. This was particularly true back in the day because there were no save states of modern emulators and flash devices to help you out. You were completely at the mercy of the software. The amazing realization of this game's quality comes with additional play. You soon will be blasting by those obstacles that were crushing your life bar, getting deeper and deeper in before a death. There is no question you must confront this piece of software with the right mindset to enjoy it. It demands multiple play sessions, it demands patience, it demands you discover its secrets by trial and error. The development team wanted a beat-em-up that was more than just walking right and wrecking some bad guys. They wanted you to think, to try new ideas, and to be challenged beyond what you had seen before. The trade-off to all that is that Comix Zone is an incredibly short title. It really only has a handful of stages, and once you get really good at it, you can beat the entire thing in under 30 minutes. Comix Zone was a peculiar game for more reasons than just its design. North American versions shipped with a music CD that contained artists and songs that had nothing to do with the content of the game. I've also seen PAL versions with a CD that has remixed vocalized versions of the songs in the actual game. Pure 90s cheese, if you will. The Japanese Mega Drive release came in September of 1995 and was among the last dozen or so titles released there. There was a PC version for Windows 95 that had a MIDI soundtrack, a GBA version with a ton of visual compromises, and there are numerous modern ways to play it for your phone and compilations available for the Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo platforms. I sternly believe that one of Sega's biggest problems as the Genesis aged was its fascination with making games difficult from the moment they started. There was no room to learn, no room to enjoy anything before you were frustrated and didn't want to play it anymore. A huge amount of the Genesis Western library suffered this to a point of absurdity. Had Comix Zone had an opening stage that better explained to you the importance of the items, how much your rat was worth keeping around, and giving you a better idea of dealing with breakable items, many more people would have flocked to its brand of adventure. Almost every great game out there that is considered difficult has opening areas that are super easy so you can get a feel for the gameplay and what is expected of you. Genesis titles tended to bombard you from the get-go and relied on your willingness to take it for the replay value. Many gamers never returned because of this, and a fair number of Genesis releases that should be considered classics aren't. Getting your butt kicked in the latter half of a great game was expected. Getting your butt kicked from the moment you press the start button does not make for a great first impression. Comix Zone will reward those of you with the patience to understand the design, but you come in expecting Streets of Rage, and I guarantee you a bad time. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.